Where do we begin? Your career is a very slippery one. Film, stage, the bookshelf, television. Is that something that you go out of your way to pursue? Do you enjoy the sort of eclectic nature of it, or is that just how it manifests?
Yes, I certainly enjoy the nature of it. Slippery is a good word, by the way. It's nothing I planned. My life has been quite haphazard. Mainly it comes from just saying yes to a very wide variety of things and then becoming known for a wide variety of things. So they keep coming my way, and I love it. If I have any rule at all, and I break every rule I try to make, it's try to that everything I do be as different as possible from the last thing I did, just to make things interesting for me, if not for any other reason, and hopefully that makes it more interesting for other people.
I'm curious what people come up to you on the street and mentioned. Is it Footloose? Is it Dexter? Is it Marsupial Sue?
Well, it's all of the above, but recently, certainly Dexter. It usually connects with what I have most presently done. Return of the Planet of the Apes. You know, that lasted for a while this summer, and now Dexter has overtaken it again.
Well, let's talk about Rise of the Planet of the Apes. I mean, that's a fantastic performance. I think it's a movie that surprised a lot of people. I'm not sure everyone expected this sort of cerebral and gripping story that it presented. That character that you play, a man in the grips of Alzheimer's. Talk about that performance a little bit.
Well, they sent me the script, and I knew this was going to be surprisingly better than people expect, because it was a wonderful script that had an inciting incident, an inciting relationship, a father-son relationship, that got people very involved emotionally. So there was a real intelligence behind it. The writers, I met with this wonderful guy, Rupert Wyatt, who by some miracle got a chance to direct this $90 million film as only his second film. And his first was practically a self-financed independent film in England, The Escapist. He was just, all of this was put at his disposal. In talking to him, I deduced that this was because 20th Century Fox thought they could push him around. But he was so smart, his intelligence, everybody eventually just said, fine, he knows what he's doing. And he also had a wonderful sense of incorporating the technology. But he directed it as a real drama. He always said, if I can keep people for the first half hour, then I have them for the whole film. I always mention that to people because I'm only in the first half hour.
On Dexter, when you played some great villains through the years. When you put together that character, there's so many choices. You have to decide what to put in, what to put out, or leave out. Tell us about that character and keeping it controlled, because it could have been really over the top.
Again, the thought process started with the pitch from Clyde Phillips, the showrunner and chief writer. I saw immediately that what was fascinating about the character was the extreme duality. He was such a bland, sort of innocuous person, a good person to all appearances. And the more ordinary he was, the more horrific his secret would be. And I thought, yeah, they found the right person. I can really, particularly since, this was the second major TV moment for me. The first one was Third Rock from the Sun. Sure. And for that, everybody knew me as this kind of wacky, ineffectual goofball. You take that preconception and you can really wrench people's perception of you. You can really completely upend their expectations, and you can be very, very scary. And I knew that was my job, was to be extremely scary.
Well, that worked. You mentioned Third Rock. That has a different sort of connection with the audience because of the persistence of it. What about issues of fatigue and energy when it comes to a TV show and that persistence?
Well, it was extremely high energy show. It was like doing energetic summer stock. You know, you had 1 week to put on a show, actually 5 days, and of those 5 days, only 3 days were proper rehearsal. And of those 3 days, one of them was just a table read. So you only had 2 days. 2 days to create an episode, 22 minutes of comedy. It was a fabulous kind of theater-based ensemble of actors, the 5 or 6 of us. And we worked very closely with the writers, and we performed for a live audience. So it was a theater, more a theater than a film experience for sure. And it was a sort of point of honor for us to give that studio audience a fantastic show and to keep canned laughter to an absolute minimum. You know, they always have to sweeten with canned laughter on sitcoms. That's the dirty little secret, even just to help the show through the edits.
Sure.
But it was a point of pride for us to make sure all the laughter was real. We really made that studio audience laugh their heads off.
Tonight we're doing canned laughter, so
we're just going to sweeten it afterwards.
One of the reasons we're here too is drama and actors education, and congratulations on this.
Thank you.
And absolutely. And in this book, you talk about theater and the rhythm of that, and how you find that particularly satisfying in the context of all the many things you've done. Do you consider yourself a stage actor first, or is that your core passion, would you say?
Well, as the book relates, I come from a theater family. My sister's here tonight, by the way, who gets several paragraphs in the book. Take a huge round of applause for Robin Lithgow, please. And theater was very much where we came from, and Shakespeare theater at that, classical repertory. We had this kind of unique childhood. My father was a regional theater actor-director, but mostly producer. He created Shakespeare festivals in Ohio. Someone in a column once called him the Johnny Appleseed of Shakespeare. But he did 4 of them, which meant a lot of gypsying around. 4 Shakespeare festivals with a few whistle stops in between. So we had this kind of unusual theatrical childhood. And it was classical. I remember seeing Death of a Salesman at age 14 and thinking, wow, you mean a play could be like that? You know, I mean, just what everybody else thought American theater was. It was brand new to me. So, and the first decade of my career, once it got going, was New York theater. And so I feel that that's been the taproot for everything. Whatever I bring to movies and TV, sometimes, often to an excess, is my theatrical chops. Movie directors are accustomed to telling me to just take it down a little. Take it down a little. Just John, take it down just a little. But I always go back to the theater because there's a good deal. This book, by the way, is about the first half of my life, my career. It's called An Actor's Education. So it was about kind of the making of me as an actor, and consequently, it's almost entirely about theater. It sort of dwells on my very first movie experiences, but as soon as I really start working in the movies and TV, that's the end of the book. It's about, and consequently, a lot of it is about theater. And this is a very long answer to your question.
I like long
Yes,
answers.
I do think of myself as a stage actor.
When you did arrive on the film scene, one of the signature sort of impressions of you was, of course, in World According to Garp. Great movie, great book. Talk about that a little bit. It's a very memorable character. It could have slipped easily into farce. Talk a little bit about that experience for you and what the Academy Award nomination meant for you.
Yeah, I had read the novel World According to Garp about 2 years before I ever heard that it would be a movie. I never thought it would be a movie. There was one scene in the novel, those of you who know the novel or the movie know the scene, which I thought completely ruled it out. But George Roy Hill took it in hand. Steve Tessich wrote this marvelous adaptation, and I was called in to read for it. I remember my agent's assistant letting me know that I had this audition for The World According to Garp. I said, wow, Garp, how great, but what am I going to play? I'm not right for anything. And the assistant said, well, I don't know. There's a typo. It says it's for the role of Roberta. And I thought, oh my God, this is my role. Unfortunately, it took George Roy Hill 8 months to decide to hire me. I was the first person he saw, but he ruled me out absolutely because he thought I was too tall. But then he spent 8 months looking for the right Roberta. Actually, they offered it to Kevin Kline, but when he did a makeup test, he looked like a pirate. So, thank God for that. And George came back to me, and I screen tested with Victor Garber and Jeff Daniels and Richard Jordan. The 4 of us were the finalists, and I got it. And as for playing the part, I think of it as like the most modest performance I've done in movies. Yes, it's an outlandish character. People thinking of it as a very bizarre kind of weird character. But in fact, Roberta is, she's gone through a transsexual operation. She's made this huge, the biggest decision you could possibly make about yourself in order to be more herself, more whole. So, I thought, as a result, there should be almost no affectation. She was a transsexual. She was not a transvestite. She was not playing a woman. She was a woman. So my whole goal was to make it as simple as possible. I also felt that it hadn't done the trick. There was an undertow of melancholy about the character. She had hoped this would make her completely whole. It hadn't made her completely whole. That and the fact that there had to be some humor. But the wonderful thing about it was calibrating it, and George Roy Hill, wonderful director, he was great about that. He wanted the first few scenes of Roberta's to be very funny, and they were. But like the third scene, the scene where she's jogging with Garp through the neighborhood, she stops and sobs. She just starts crying because she can't have children. And suddenly you realize, oh my God, I'm not going to just be laughing at this character. These are wonderful characters to play that have those colors and those emotional surprises.
Terms of Endearment would follow a few years later, and that's also a film marked by its emotion and its sort of bookshelf heritage. What was that like for you?
It was quite a surprise. There was an amazing sequence of movies. I moved out to Los Angeles at just the time Garp came out, and in very quick succession, out came Garp, Twilight Zone, Footloose, Terms of Endearment, and Buckaroo Banzai. Oh, Buckaroo. All like within 2.5 years. It was crazy. But I was doing Footloose. I was rehearsing for Footloose when I was asked to do Terms of Endearment because they were replacing the actor playing my part. This man had shot a couple of scenes, and it just wasn't, it was setting the wrong tone. This was an adulterous affair with one of the leading ladies in the film, and it was just, James Brooks saw him, even though he'd written the role for this other actor, he saw that this is not going to work, that we're going to lose too much of the audience. So for some reason, they decided that I was the perfect actor to play an adulterer. And they came to me. And there I was rehearsing for Footloose, and Herb Ross, who was quite a tough customer, he wouldn't let me out. He wouldn't let me out. Not even releasing me from rehearsal for 5 days. I just think he wanted me all to himself. Fortunately, they were both Paramount films, and Jeff Katzenberg, of all people, at Paramount at the time, told Herb, "You're going to let him out." And that's why I got to do Terms of Endearment. But my entire role was shot in 5 days. Really? And I was only hired like a day before I went to work on it. So there was very little preparation, and they had to get everything done so that I could go back to Herb.
Some actors would be very upset to have that short of period of time to prepare. I mean, especially in film, I think, it's a director's medium, and really the only control actors have is over their performance. They're not sure what's going to get in the film, and many of them seem to be intensely interested in research and things like that. Are you one of those people, or do you find that a short window is frustrating for you?
You can't afford to be Nebraska. And I just stood and chatted with the manager of the supermarket for about 15 minutes. Who was this wonderful kind of herky-jerky guy, Robin and I, our family grew up mostly in Ohio, which Nebraskans do not consider the Midwest. But it's the Midwest. And I just felt chatting with him, this is all I need, just these few minutes, listen to his voice and watch him smile and laugh. And I looked down at his shoes, and his shoes were exactly like the shoes that Christy Z had found for me. And that was my preparation.
That's great. That's fantastic.
The only thing I think I arrived, and the costume designer, Christy Z, she had all sorts of J.C. Penney suits for me to try on, and wonderful cordovan shoes. And we were shooting at an A&P or something in Lincoln, Nebraska. And I just stood and chatted with the manager of the supermarket for about 15 minutes. Who was this wonderful kind of herky-jerky guy, Robin and I, our family grew up mostly in Ohio, which Nebraskans do not consider the Midwest. But it's the Midwest. And I just felt chatting with him, this is all I need, just these few minutes, listen to his voice and watch him smile and laugh. And I looked down at his shoes, and his shoes were exactly like the shoes that Christy Z had found for me. And that was my preparation.
That's great. That's fantastic. Are you able to mimic people? Do you download a lot when you're meeting people? Do you store things away, scraps?
Yeah, I guess I do. I'm not a very good mimic, but I do note things. I had the most extraordinary experience on the airplane today. I flew down from Seattle this morning, and I sat next to this guy, and I talked to him, and he had the most extraordinary personal tic. He was a guy who sold heating supplies or something like that. And every single sentence he spoke, he would end it with a little laugh. Everything he said. And there was literally not one thing he said that he didn't. He just tacked on a little chuckle. And I thought, this is so bizarre. But when you meet somebody like that, as a character actor, you feel so validated and so liberated. You say, no matter what you do, it's not too much. Because human beings are so much more bizarre than anything you do as an actor.
That's fantastic.
It was amazing. I felt like thanking him. It's just like, I'm going to use that someday.
He kind of makes me nervous too, though. And
I hope he's not watching. Perhaps he's here tonight.
He's here for the laugh track, actually. We use him.
Think of the bizarre behaviors you see, like walking out halfway through an interview. It's like no.
That's why you love theater. Filmmakers, you've worked with so many filmmakers through the years. Is there tell us a story about a director that will give us some insight into either their craft or your relationship with them?
What has always fascinated me, particularly in the theater, is as an actor, you work with scores of directors. I've probably worked with 150 directors by now. I've seen so many different ways of working, so many different temperaments, so many different skill sets. Directors work with nobody except themselves. They have no idea how other directors operate. And think about that for a minute. Some of them came up sort of hanging around observing and apprenticing, but most of them not, particularly in the theater. And so they work in their own mode. They've worked out their own sort of system. They are so different. And they just have different areas of strengths and weaknesses. And let's see. I'll tell you, I remember talking with George Roy Hill, who was certainly one of my favorite movie directors, but he was an old-time movie director. He was a Marine. He came out of live theater live television in the 1950s. We rehearsed for 2 weeks with tape on the floor, just like theater. He literally did run-throughs of the movie with Miros Andrzejczyk, his cinematographer. He was super prepared, so he practically had to direct not at all once the movie started. It was done. It was just a matter of filming it. And I was talking to him about what I just said, that there are all these different areas in which filmmakers have to operate. You know, some are good at camera, some work well with actors, some are great at script, some at story, some are just great at deal making and getting it all done, and some are great writers. And he said, no. There's only 3 things to directing a movie: the script, the cast, and the execution. That's it. This is my kind of director. You know, and it was true. You just felt so secure in his hands. I imagine working with Eastwood is kind of like that. I've always wished I could work with him because he's from that same vein. I just love directors who you can almost gauge their sense of security by the number of setups and the number of takes. Directors who settle for 2 takes because they've got what they need. I just love that. Yeah. Because then it's, you know, because there's such life to, Capra always said, if you haven't got it on the first take, you'll probably never get it. Because that's when the bloom is still on the rose. I don't know, it's not always the case, of course.
Yeah. Well, Eastwood even shoots the rehearsals and sometimes uses that, which is kind of crazy. So
I just had the fabulous experience of working with Judd Apatow, who, working in a way I've never worked before. And Judd, just, you know, with this new HD technology, he just has the 3 cameras rolling for 15 minutes, and you just mess around and improvise. You have a script, but the script is a jumping off point. He's about maybe 3 yards away, yelling lines and telling you to repeat that and saying, rephrase that, and your mind has to be so alert and so on top of things. That's, of course, a very, very different kind of movie altogether. This is comedy, where he's trying to capture life and capture accidents and surprise his actors and surprise even himself and capture it all on film. That was fun too, but a completely different discipline.
And what project is that?
Oh, that's called This Is 40, a comedy, a very grown-up comedy that'll be out next year. It continues the story of the couple in the subplot of Knocked Up, Leslie Mann and Paul Rudd and their 2 daughters. And I have no idea what this movie is going to be, because he has about 1 million choices on the basis of these long, fabulous takes. But something tells me it's going to be fantastic.
And then you're going back to the stage with The Columnist. You and I were
right.
talking a little bit about that.
Yeah.
That sounds fascinating. When is that? That's in the spring? Or?
I start rehearsing March 1st.
And you play a journalist in that?
I'm playing Joseph Alsop, the older of the 2 Alsop brothers. Raise your hands if you know who the Alsops are. Raise your hands if you don't know who the Alsops are. See, this is good news. Joseph Alsop was a hugely important journalist in the 40s, 50s, 60s. A kingmaker, a guy who was so involved in policy. He literally would browbeat presidents, you know. He was a huge, his cousin was Eleanor Roosevelt, and he was like this with Franklin Roosevelt. He was well, I could go on and on, but he's a fascinating, fascinating character. But this is the second play written by David Auburn, who wrote, his first play was Proof. And this play is every bit as good. It's fabulous. I shouldn't be overselling it, but I can't help it. And I'm going to play Joe Alsop in it, which is a great, great role.
And of course, you won a Tony for Sweet Smell of Success, another journalist, another columnist of vintage age. That one was probably based on Winchell, right? Walter Winchell in many ways. But this one, it's much more of a historical. When you take on a real life character, how does that affect your process and your aspirations?
Well, I'm not crazy about playing live characters, mainly because, I mean, for example, I played Abraham Lincoln in my day, and I played FDR. People know you really have to do an impersonation. You can't make people entirely forget the real thing. Some people pull it off. Frank Langella was wonderful in Frost Nixon on stage. But there is just something, it is so clearly an imitation. In this case, look at how many people raised their hands. Never heard of Joe Alsop, not to mention not knowing what he looks like. I'm very different from him, and it doesn't matter. I feel quite free to go after a kind of essence of his character based on what I've learned about him and what is written in the play. He is from Brahmin, New England stock. He went to Harvard. He had great English airs. The fascinating thing about him was that he was a closeted gay man in an era when this was completely something you did not admit to. Nobody did. It was dangerous information. So just on the basis of what I've told you, it's just an incredible drama, incredibly tense drama about journalism and policy and history, but mainly about interpersonal anguish between him and his brother Stuart, between him and his wife, between him and his daughter, stepdaughter. I'm going on too much about it. I'm telling you too much. You got to come to New York and see it.
Let's all go. It'll be great. Every chapter of our life presents a new challenge and a new opportunity for all of us. For you as an actor, specifically, what do you see as your biggest challenge these days, either in craft or in the choices you make or just your approach?
For an actor, the challenges remain the same. First, to get your next job. My big challenges, the biggest challenge in my life is bad writing. Everybody says, what's the hardest job? What's the hardest part you ever played? It's the badly written parts. Sure. Actors depend so much on good writing, and they value it so much. As far as challenges in my life, I guess it's trying to just to sort of keep it real. I mean, I'm married to a professor who lives a professor's life, is at UCLA, and a professor's life and an actor's life are completely different. I'm always all over the place, and we spend lots and lots of time away from each other. That's a huge challenge, but somehow we've figured it out. 30 years is our next anniversary, so it's. But I feel I'm a happy man. I feel like a very lucky actor. I don't really worry about my next job because I usually have my next job. So I think my early years were far more challenging, which is why if they weren't, my memoir would not be very interesting. And it is.
And this memoir, and it's getting fantastic reviews, including the McNulty review in the Los Angeles Times. Congratulations on that. Your father, and it's impossible to separate this document that you've created from your relationship with him. Talk a little bit about that.
My dad was a wonderful man, and he was at the very vanguard of the regional theater movement. I had the book, and several of you have told me you saw the solo show I did at the Mark Taper Forum in January. That show grew out of a very intense experience with my dad near the end of his life. And I write about it's both the beginning and the end of the book, because the book grew out of the solo show. I did the show in 2008. He died in 2004. I did the show in 2008. And when I did the show in New York in a very small setting and only 2 performances a week, it created a stir and I got a book deal out of it. At that point, I began the memoir. Until then, I had never written anything from my own experience to perform on stage. When I had a success with it on stage, I'd never written anything of my own experience in the form of a memoir, let alone a long book. But it all grew out of that. So inevitably, the book was going to be almost a dual biography of myself and my dad. Or of the whole family and my dad. He had an enormous influence on our lives. It has a certain trajectory. I absolutely idolized him growing up. When I actually worked for him, because he was the first person to hire me as a professional, I realized that he was not the great God that I thought he was, and I wanted to move on, go to New York and work, really test myself in the marketplace. And at the very moment when my career took off, he began to struggle with his. All of those issues, and yet in the end of his life, I sort of realized more intensely than ever what a hero of mine he was. And the book sort of has that shape. So it is a book about him. Even there are long, long sections of the book where he does not appear, but to my mind, he's very much a presence even then.
Would you guys like to hear him read a little bit from the book? Would you do that for us?
The book is in the form of many, many, many stories. It's kind of a meditation on storytelling along with everything else. And there is a little section which is a handy thing to read because it's very entertaining. I figure I better entertain you or I won't be doing my job. This is chapter 9 in the book. It's called Curtains. This is just part of the chapter, but it's the entertaining part. I was a curtain puller for Marcel Marceau. For decades, the immortal French mime was a yearly one-night-only fixture at the McCarter Theater, presenting his delicate art in hypnotic silence for wildly appreciative full houses. On one of his visits, this was in Princeton, New Jersey, where my dad was running the McCarter Theater and I was in high school. On one of his visits, I was pressed into service. I was assigned the job of raising and lowering McCarter's massive red velour curtain for Marceau's single performance. It was one of many backstage jobs that I undertook at the theater for piddling wages, but mostly for fun, during my 2 high school years in Princeton. At various times, I had run lights, painted sets, fashioned lobby displays, and operated the fly lines that hoisted flats and set pieces up and down. But pulling the curtain for the great Marcel Marceau was the best gig of all. I was humbled by the honor. In those days, Marceau was a one-of-a-kind Gallic superstar, his slight frame and unique persona recognizable everywhere. In performance, his face was painted stark white, with his mouth, eyes, and eyebrows delicately outlined in red and black. He wore white pants cut to halfway down his calves, a striped shirt, a tight short jacket, ballet slippers, and a little blue hat with a flower sprouting out of it. In this emblematic costume, he performed a show that was simplicity itself. He would present about a dozen short mime pieces, most of them in the character of Bip, his alter ego. Marceau would chase butterflies, struggle against the wind, grow drunk at a cocktail party, or seasick on board a cruise ship, all in pantomime. The entire performance took place on an empty stage without props, sets, or supporting players. Or rather, all of these things were there, but invisible, created by the magic of Marceau's physical gifts, by the eloquent lighting, and by the imagination of the audience. Clearly, the rise and fall of the curtain was also pretty damn important. On the day of Marceau's performance, I watched worshipfully from backstage all through his afternoon technical rehearsal. Although he had been through the drill 1,000 times over the years, his preparation was exhaustive and precise. When it came time to rehearse the curtain call, his stage manager instructed me in broken English to raise and lower the curtain in a steady rhythm as Marceau took several bows. This was known as bouncing the curtain, and it required that I quickly master a complex new skill. In the wings, I stood in front of 2 thick ropes. I would pull on one of the ropes to ring down the curtain, while the other rope shot up in the opposite direction. When the curtain was almost down, I would grab the second rope and allow it to lift me 4 feet off the ground. At this point, my counterbalancing weight would reverse the direction of the 2 ropes. I would drop back down to the floor, then pull on the second rope with all my might. The curtain would bounce, barely touching the stage, then gracefully rise up again. For Marcel Marceau, I was to repeat this maneuver 10 times. 5 times up and 5 times down. It was a tricky business, demanding enormous effort and split-second timing, but by the end of the tech rehearsal, I'd mastered it. The evening performance was sensational. Each of the mimed mini-dramas was greeted with clamorous adulation. I and the entire McCarter crew performed our backstage tasks with self-assurance and a sure hand. Marceau had craftily saved his best material for last, and in the final moments of his performance, the audience was completely transported. I'd never heard such an ovation. Then came the curtain call. I brought the curtain down on cue. After a poetic pause, I switched ropes and pulled it back up again. I switched again, ready to bounce the curtain. The second rope hoisted me high off the ground. The curtain reversed course and came back down. I switched ropes and was hoisted up again. The curtain bounced nicely off the stage and went straight back up. Perfection. I switched again, gaining confidence as the cheers rang out. Down, up, down, up, as Marceau smiled, clutched his heart, and grandly bowed. On the 4th bow, the curtain came down. I switched ropes, and once again I lurched back up in the air. But by this time, my strength was flagging. I lost my grip and fell in a heap onto the stage floor. I scrambled to my feet and stared at the 2 ropes as they gradually slowed to a stop. Terror engulfed me. I had no idea which one I should grab next. Hoping for the best, I reached for the one on the right and pulled on it for all I was worth. I pulled and pulled and pulled and pulled. Bit by bit, the rope offered less and less resistance. The roar of the crowd was oddly diminishing. A ghastly thought dawned on me. Had I grabbed the wrong rope? I turned and looked out at the stage. What I saw filled me with horror. Between Marcel Marceau and the audience was a massive pile of dark red velour about 8 feet high. It was McCarter's grand show curtain lying on the stage like an enormous felled giant. Instead of bringing the curtain back up, I'd brought it down, 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 piling it up, up, up on the stage. This mountain of fabric was attached to a long metal pipe and a series of tangled wires. These hung down from McCarter's fly space in full view of the audience, swaying slowly from side to side. The crowd had fallen into a deathly silence. As for Marcel Marceau, he was standing erect with his hands on his hips, his weight on one leg and a foot turned out. He was staring at me with stony fixity. his immobile face with its bone-white makeup, its knit brow, and its gash-like red sneer could only be described as a mask of rage. Predictably, the famous mime said nothing.
That's pretty awesome. You know, there's such a rhythm to the writing, and I have to say, you know, I have 2 kids, and you're a well-known person in our house because of your books like Marsupial Sue, and also the music like Singing in the Bathtub. When you do entertainment for children, it seems to be very respectful of the audience, which isn't always the case. A lot of times, that kind of entertainment can be condescending. How has that part of your career affected your voice, and why do you do entertainment for children?
Children are a completely fantastic audience and a wonderful change of pace. They just have a totally different sensibility, and they're a very difficult audience because you can't lose their attention for a second. But if you keep their attention, especially for an hour-long concert, it's just you feel like an extraordinary achievement. It's wonderful to delight them because they, you know, just developmentally, they have a different sense of reality. You know, what we're all after as actors is a suspension of disbelief, but we never succeed at that completely. I mean, we can move an audience and make them laugh, but they never forget they're in a theater and that you're pretending. They never completely forget. They're transported, but they don't forget. Kids have no idea about this concept. They barely know they're in a theater. They think they're looking at the real thing at any given moment, and it's just incredible to you know, they're so stupid. They just, but but I do these devices in my concerts. It's a concert with songs, and a lot of the songs are about animals. I have this huge easel, and I play this game. I tell them how to play it. It's guess the animals. I'll start drawing, and you have to guess the animal before I finish the drawing. And I'll do a huge drawing of, say, a hippopotamus. And I'll be almost, you know, halfway done. Already they're screaming because they think they know it. And then they do know it. It's a hippo. And I turn and I say, it's a what? It's a what? It's a hippo. I say, that's so funny. I thought you would get this one. It's a hippo. Hippo. And I say, you're right, it's a hippo! And I finish the drawing and I sing the great Flanders and Swan hippopotamus song for them. And they listen, you know. They listen. You know, it's just, my other device is the first song I sing, I wear a little derby hat or a top hat or something. I sing the song. I haven't even spoken to them yet, but I sing a song. And I finish the song, and they love the song, and I start talking to them and greeting them. And the pianist or one of the musicians sort of says, "Your hat." And I say, "What? What? Your hat?" And I say, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I do this all the time. I put my hat on, I sing the song, I forget to take my hat off. It's my worst habit. If I do it again, be sure you tell me." And then in the course of the concert, I wear the most ridiculous hats that get sillier and sillier. You know, kangaroo ears and little beanie propellers and a pith helmet. And every time I forget to take the hat off. And I start to talk to them about the next song. And they, "Take off your hat!" Like it's a matter of monumental importance, you know. It's a vile trick on them. But they just love it, and they feel so good. And I say, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I did it again. Why didn't you tell me?" And they say, "We did!" By the way, don't tell them about this.
As if John tells you you're young at heart, he thinks you're stupid.
I think this is going to haunt me.
A lot of times, a veteran performer will be asked for advice for newcomers. I'm sure people ask you all the time, do you have advice for young actors? I don't want to ask you that. I want to ask you if you have a warning. I think warnings are more interesting than advice. What would you warn young actors about, either for age-old issues or contemporary ones?
Well, I just think the only warning is it's a very, very tough business, and inform them. As I said before, I'm an extremely lucky actor. Not only have I had lots of jobs, but I'm 65 years old and I'm still going strong. I mean, it's so many actors, they just can't go the distance, because it's not through no fault of their own usually. It's just it's a very, very brutal profession. And I tell them that. I say, don't have any illusions. If there's anything you can do instead of act, do it. It's a profession so defined by rejection and disappointment and failure. It's terribly, terribly hard. Do not become an actor. But if you are truly going to become an actor, you're going to ignore everything I've just said anyway. Sure. And, I grew up in a theater family, and I think it was a tremendous advantage for me to have some sense of the reality of the acting profession. I grew up not wanting to be an actor, sort of wanting to avoid being an actor. And I was sort of forced into it by the sound of applause. But I mean, that's the way to become an actor, not want it. Yeah. And then just finally give in, But no, I'm tough on young kids, but you talk to a group, though. I spoke to kids at Lambda, my alma mater in England. I went to the NYU Tisch School graduate program, and you see these people, and they're going to be fine. They are just so clearly full of talent and energy and confidence. And you can make a career out of it if you have that equipment.
There's so many roles that you've had in projects that have had commercial success and projects that have had critical success, acclaim. But a lot of times I would imagine that the most satisfying roles aren't necessarily the ones that everybody expects. Sometimes it might be something smaller, something that took you to a place you didn't expect. Tell us about something that you're very, very proud of that we may not know about.
Most of the work that I'm most proud of has been on the stage in front of live audiences. So consequently, an audience like this probably hasn't seen it. The Changing Room, my first show on Broadway. Raise your hands if you saw The Changing Room. My sister, that's it. No.
Raise your hand if you liked it.
She did like it. M. Butterfly in the 1980s was a tremendous experience. It's been a wonderful trip. I mean, I've had all sorts of fabulous experiences. I think I name theater experiences because on stage you just feel like it's the whole package. It's completely there's something unique about being the teller of the story while the audience is there, living through the experience with them. You get a version of that on film and on TV, but it's not quite as complete. It doesn't make me a snob about movies and TV. I love movies and TV, and I'm very proud of a lot of work I've done. But as I said before, what I do that is special in movies and TV tends to be what I bring from the theater. So,
Changing Room, you got a Tony nomination for that.
Tony Award.
Tony Award. Well, a nomination. I wasn't done.
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
You were leading up to that, I see.
Sorry. Okay. Okay. And you of course won a Tony for that. And it's to have that success early on, was that good for you, or did looking back now, how did you receive that, and how did it propel you?
Oh, it was extremely exciting. That was for The Changing Room. It was my Broadway debut. You say it's early on, but it was after 3 years of no acting work in New York at all. I just couldn't get going as an actor. And then we did the changing room at Long Wharf Theater in New Haven. It came in lock, stock, and barrel. It opened on March 7th, 1973, and I won that Tony on March 25th. It must be the fastest sprint to a Tony Award from a debut of any actor in history. And I remember distinctly feeling, oh, got that over with. You know, I mean, I was completely elated. I probably didn't sleep for a month. It was so exciting. And I have to say, I've never been out of work ever since. I mean, it was literally the beginning of my working career in New York theater. And my career in New York theater is what set me up for work in film and television. So there's no question that that performance and that award made a huge, huge difference in my life. I mean, it's easy to dismiss awards, but it was a fantastic experience. And my heart practically exploded, and it really got me going. It put me on the map. So
I may be more interested in Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai Beyond the Eighth Dimension than anybody else in this room. Maybe not, but I just, that movie caught me just right at just the right time in my life. The people that seem to really enjoy that movie and approach you about it, would you say those are the scariest fans you have?
Actually, I think it's one of my most exuberant performances on film. Completely crazy and hilariously fun. Making that film, we never stopped laughing except when the cameras were rolling, and even then. There's the moment when Chris Lloyd stands behind me and gives me the finger. If you ever look at the movie again, you'll see me in the corner laughing my head off. It was just completely joyful. They're going to screen it at the Film Society at Lincoln Center on October 15th, a kind of reunion video of the screening of that.
We should do one in L.A.
Actually, the film festival showed it last year. On a night, I was interviewed by David Anson, my old friend and the director of the film festival. He called the evening Over the Top with John Lithgow. It was Buckaroo Banzai with a curtain raiser of the Twilight Zone episode.
Wow.
That was my over the top evening. And people asked me if I was insulted by the title, and I said, oh, no, I was very deeply complimented.
Have you seen the movie? Twilight Zone was following Shatner's 1960s version of that character. When you're doing something that's been done before, do you look at the other thing as a beginning point, or do you try to separate and stand aside?
I finally saw the Shatner episode, but 5 years after we did it, and it was completely different. So no, there was no point really. Yeah. No, the Twilight Zone was that was another huge breakthrough. George Miller directed me in that. He was the first movie director. It was maybe the 7th or 8th movie I'd done, but it was the first one where the director told me to do more instead of less. So there was no stopping me after that.
That's great. We're going to take some questions from the audience.
I most certainly met a few. I remember the great veterans that I worked with were people like George C. Scott. No, I didn't. I never worked with George Scott, but Jason Robards and Colleen Dewhurst in 2 different productions. I was so thrilled to be able to work with them. I think the only person I worked with from the kind of the old time Hollywood was the person. I wrote a chapter about him in the book. The chapter is called Mr. Pleasant, which was the nickname that the crew came up with for him. It's a chapter about my sort of discovering diva behavior in the movies. And I use a pseudonym, and I won't tell you who he was.
Come on.
If that doesn't sell a few books, I don't know what will. But he's the only real old-timer. It's like that, was it Byron White on the Supreme Court? I can't define it, but I know when I see it. I guess it's just, it's that old corny cliche of an actor saying, my guy just wouldn't say this. Some writers just don't, they don't have a real sense of how human beings talk to each other. I don't know, it's hard to define. But you certainly know good writing when you see it. There's no question. It just has reality, and everything is motivated, and you just see the beats in the scenes. You see that the writer has. The wonderful thing is that when the actors come into the mix, the writers themselves see stuff that they didn't even know was there. But the actors can only do that if there's something very, very strong to begin with. But that's a good question. How do you define bad writing? Well, that's good writing, for one thing. Just to absolutely believe the truth of this completely preposterous parable. I mean, those of you who don't know, *M. Butterfly* is about a diplomat in the 1960s in China who falls in love with a Chinese opera star and conducts a 20-year-long affair with her without ever realizing that she is, number one, a spy, and number two, a man. It's this kind of, everybody, in fact, David Huang had the good sense to, in the very first scene, to have someone say, how could he not have known? You know, because that, of course, is the whole dilemma. But in its way, the play answers that question. The actor's job is to just completely believe that this happened. It's a whole play about self-delusion, and it's astonishing. You know, this is no news to any of you. It's astonishing how we can delude ourselves. That's what the play is about, taken to the most basic elemental extreme. I don't think so. Roles don't work that way on me. You hope they work that way on the audience. I guess it's a matter. You certainly feel a tremendous sense of joy. It's kind of hard to define the excitement of having an impact on an audience. But I wouldn't say it literally changes me. It just kind of elates me. It sort of enlarges me. It certainly enlarges my ego. But I tend to leave it at the office. I mean, I get that question often, like, oh my God, didn't Dexter, give you nightmares? Well, in fact, it did give me nightmares. But I just walked away from it at the end of the day, elated half the time, because it was so exciting. I mean, the scenes were so great. They were very grisly. There's something weird about me that I thought it was so much fun.
Oh, we all thought you had fun. We all loved it.
Well, theater is a much more athletic thing. You have to be prepared for movies. You just have to be in shape. Plays have this 4-week-long kind of training period called rehearsals. And I just think it's a much more sustained, strenuous activity, sustaining a performance, especially if it's a big part, over 2 hours. It's like a wind sprint, and you just have to be in shape for it. You never know what's going to happen what's going to hit you on movies, which is the danger. Suddenly, you're told, you know what we should do? Let's do this play. Let's do this scene running. Let's have you run as fast as you can over this field while you're saying your line. You have to be ready for that, but you never know when it's going to hit. But in theater, it's like polishing a gem. You have the performance by the time you perform it.
Way in the back.
Well, actually, there's a whole chapter about that too. It was. Um, these are shills out here. It was a chapter called Utopia because it was, of all things, a very campy Gilbert and Sullivan operetta. My sophomore year at Harvard, a play for an operetta I'd never sung on stage before, for one thing. And I was cast at the last minute when another actor dropped out. I only had a couple of weeks to prepare for this. And to learn all this music and all this four-part harmony, there was this one incredible number, which I describe in great detail, that opened the second act. It was a septet of all the principal men in the show, and it was in the form of a British music hall minstrel show. And it's famously the big show-stopping number in the show. So we'd planned 2 encores. And sure enough, the first time we performed it, the audience went nuts, and we performed an encore. And they went nuts, and we performed another encore. And I was at the center of this. I sang all the verses. And each encore I did more and more ridiculous things. I fake tap danced, and I juggled little gold balls. Well, we only had 2 encores planned, so all the other actors took off on either side. They carried their chairs, they carried their instruments. I was left alone on stage, waiting to start the next scene, and the audience did not stop applauding. They applauded, they cheered, they roared. It felt like about 10 minutes of applause. Of course, it was only about 15 seconds. But it was during those 15 seconds I decided to become an actor. Deborah Winger, absolutely. I just loved working with Deborah Winger in terms of Endearment. All varieties. I mean, I worked the first year that Meryl Streep was a professional actor. I was in 4 plays with her. She was certainly one of the best, although we were actually played opposite each other in not a very good production. Let's see. Who else? All varieties. I don't know. In the last many years, I guess because I've grown old, thank God I've gotten to this age, I've worked with all these fabulous young men. They've all been almost, it's been an avuncular, almost paternal relationship with Norbert Leo Butz, Brian Darcy James, Ben Chaplin, Paul Rudd, just these great young guys. That seems to be the sort of paradigm. And at this point, when it comes to leading ladies, I tend to be their father.
You must be satisfied to see Joseph Gordon-Levitt's.
Joey's success is just a wonderful thing for all of us. We always loved him, and he has been very flattering to all of us, saying that his experience on Third Rock from the Sun sort of prepared him for this. You just see what a winning actor he is now. The wonderful thing about Joey is, on Third Rock, he played an old man in a young boy's body, and that was kind of Joey. He was weirdly mature for such a young kid. He was so grown up, kind of serious. He was the most serious of any of us. And now he's older now, but he's like a boy in a man's body. He's just the opposite. You just see his joy in acting. It makes us all very happy.
That's lovely.
Well, I give so much credit to William Shakespeare. I mean, when I was growing up, all the acting that I did up until the age of 18 or so was Shakespeare plays. I was in 20 Shakespeare plays by the time I was 20 years old. and not big parts. I was a kind of journeyman. My parts were Nim, Pinch, Poins. They all had only one syllable. Eventually I graduated to Hortensio and Guildenstern, but and Lucilius, Artemidorus. But they're all little parts. But if you think, my dad produced festivals where there were 5, 6, 7 Shakespeare plays in one summer, and you'd be in all those plays. Well, Shakespeare wrote King Lear, but he also wrote Comedy of Errors, and he also wrote Winter's Tale and The Tempest and As You Like It. Such a vast variety of plays and roles, and you'd play a different one every night, and that was the joy of it and the challenge of it. And it was expected of all the actors, and I sort of expect that of myself now. What I said before about being different every time out, you're stuck with your own body and your own voice, and eventually people will get tired of you, but you do what you can to do exactly what you said, reinvent yourself.